Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. With a name like Phadnis, you would expect me to speak Marathi fluently. I love listening to Tukaram Zabhanga, learnt a lot about Marathi literature from Govind Deshpande, but I cannot speak Marathi. I cannot read Marathi. This is partly because my ancestors went to Tamil Nadu many hundred years ago, and the language that we speak fluently is Tamil, but not Marathi. So I represent that deracinated group of people who are neither urban nor rural, neither regional nor national, seeking their roots, but largely living in an invented world. This is where I get a little bit confused. Is my world invented, or is the invention the world in Pune, Bangalore, Varanasi, Madurai or Srinagar? These are all cities self-confident in their identities, believing nothing will ever change. And yet, change is happening in these cities under our very eyes in our own lifetimes. But we are here not to talk about change in a loose sense, but about the effect the change in economy, society, communication and politics is having on our existence. The global village is a cliche term overused and abused, but let us consider for a moment how it is affecting our lives. Let me give you an example of how communication is changing the way we live, the way we see politics. I was a young intern, aged 19, living and working in Hyderabad in a newspaper called Eenadu. It was, those who have studied Andhra politics will know that this was the newspaper which was in part responsible for bringing N.T. Ramarao and the Telugu Desam party into power. So I turned on the radio, and while having my morning cup of coffee and heard the news that Indira Gandhi had been assassinated. I was a journalist and I had to be where the action was. I was so excited I had to share the news with someone. So I immediately got dressed, put my coffee down, hailed an auto, and I told the auto wala, you know, Indira Amma has been killed. When he didn't react, I thought he hadn't heard me. So I repeated a bit more loudly. Yes, yes, I heard you, he said testily, but I don't believe you. Why? I asked, a little irritated. I was a journalist and I knew better than everyone else what was happening. I knew more than everyone else. He just shook his head. Okay, so whom will you believe? I said, half irritated, half amused. He thought for a while and then he said, when I listen to Mark Tully on BBC telling me what has happened, then I will believe it. So here was an autowala, like a good Indian, skeptical of the Indian media's capacity to tell the truth. But he was among lakhs of Indians who had read the BBC, who had heard the BBC, who was hearing the BBC on a regular basis and used that as a link to the outside world. Today you have Google, you have Facebook and Twitter, neither of which I am on, thankfully. The Android phone and 100 other gizmos that put you in touch with all parts of the globe instantly. If that is not urbanization, I don't know what is. So you have first-time voters who are in touch with each other all over India, who may be tilling the field or getting others to till the field as it happens in our feudal country. But can take a break to check the latest in Ukraine on a real-time basis. This is a considerable departure from the past. In the political space, there is an enabling environment, a context. What has happened in the last 1 decade is something I feel we have not given enough importance to. This is the process of delimitation of constituencies across India. As you know, the Constitution of India provides for changes in the nature of constituencies by appointing a delimitation commission after a certain period of time, after every so many years. Since then, the nature of constituencies has changed beyond imagination. The Delimitation Commission has not increased or decreased seats, the overall number of seats in the Lok Sabha, but it has redrawn boundaries of seats. This applies to assemblies as well as the Lok Sabha seats. Professor Vidyut Joshi in Ahmedabad has done a fantastic study on the effect of delimitation of constituencies in Gujarat. On the basis of population changes made in the last 40 years, he finds that the following changes have been made. 1. More villages have been merged in urban areas. 2. Urban population has reached 50% of the state population. 3. The population in some constituencies has receded and hence there is an imbalance in the size of constituencies. 4. Total population reached up to 5 crore in 2001 in Gujarat, an increase of almost 45%, as a result of which the average size of each constituency has reached around 2 lakh. It's below 1 lakh in Haryana. The result of this delimitation, as a result of this delimitation, the number of seats in the Gujarat Assembly have increased, but the boundaries in almost all constituencies have been redrawn. So 40 old constituencies, mostly rural, have ceased to exist, whereas 40 new constituencies have been designed. Now, Gujarat is hot property these days intellectually because it has the answer, we are told, to all questions. So, what was the impact of this delimitation in Gujarat? Who were the forces behind delimitation? In what way was the process influenced? Did it help or hinder the prospects of one or other political parties, which would then have had a catalytic effect on the politics of the country, which actually it did? So just look at the tribal constituencies in Gujarat. In 2007, there were 28 tribal constituencies, which has been reduced to in 2012 to 27. Obviously, one general seat has increased. This has happened because of migration among tribals to urban areas. Scheduled caste seats have remained the same, which is 14, but some scheduled caste constituencies have become general ones, whereas some general seats have been converted into scheduled caste reserve seats. About 40 constituencies have been abolished and new urban-oriented constituencies have emerged. Let us take a few examples. I mean, you don't have to go into such micro detail, but I was studying it, so I found it very interesting. A glaring example is the Khadia constituency in the heart of Ahmedabad. A BJP bastion for a long time, having hardly any Muslim voters, the redrawn Khadia has now become a Muslim-dominated seat, as over 1 lakh voters, around 50%, are now Muslims. The BJP had become weak there, but I understand the BJP has done astonishingly well in this constituency, and that lends some credence to the BJP claim, I don't know, I still have to study this, to the BJP claim that Muslims have also voted for us. Who were the people or persons or forces behind this clear push of redrawing constituencies by making them much more urban in Gujarat? This is a very interesting story. In December 2002, Narendra Modi crushed the Congress in Gujarat to win a record 126 seats in the 182-member Gujarat Assembly. The man in his party who won by the highest margin of votes, almost 160,000 votes, the margin alone, which is pretty good in an assembly constituency, was Amit Anil Chandra Shah from Sarkhej in Gujarat, in Ahmedabad. Sarkhej has elected Shah as its MLA in 4 consecutive elections. He improved his 2002 margin of victory in 2007 and won a total of 235,000 votes, so which is again pretty good. Till the Sohrabuddin fake encounter case came back to haunt him, Shah's stars had been in ascendance, largely also because he had a mentor in Narendra Modi. It was generally believed that if Modi moved to Delhi, it would be Shah who would be his successor. But that is not the full story. The real story about the ascendance of Amit Shah, why he owes his rise, is because of some carefully choreographed political moves, especially relating to delimitation in Gujarat. Professor Joshi's analysis tells us delimitation strategically changed the social composition of at least 60 seats out of 182. More villages were merged in urban areas, leading to 50% of the population of the state becoming urban. The population in some constituencies came down, leading to an imbalance in the size of constituencies. And the size of the population in constituencies on an average went up to 200,000. The party that knew its organization and the state was best placed to gain from the delimitation. Even much more than Narendra Modi, Shah was that man. He knew his party, he knew the state. So not only did he guide the exercise of delimitation, he was one of the key BJP members in the West Zone Committee set up by the Election Commission in 2008 for the delimitation of constituencies in western states. So he saw the potential of the gains of delimitation, and he did it in such a way that neutralized the political challenge the BJP was facing. Few know that actually the political challenge that the BJP was facing at that time was not from the Congress, but from the Nationalist Congress Party, the NCP, and of course much more from internally from Keshubhai Patel. So he was Modi's most persistent rival, and he, as you know, set up the Gujarat Parivartan Party when he was virtually edged out of the BJP, set up as a proxy front by his aides, including Govardhan Zadafia, who has now rejoined the BJP. So almost everywhere, constituencies were, but the delimitation was helped Keshubhai, but only in Saurashtra. Almost everywhere else, constituencies were redrawn in such a way that they were made more urban, and these generally went to the BJP and Modi's advantage. This was not the only asset that Shah had. In Gujarat currently, there is no one who knows the structure of the cooperative sector in the state better than Amit Shah. The cooperatives helped establish Sharad Pawar in Maharashtra, and they were a mainstay for the Congress in Gujarat. So over the years, Shah helped break this and brought the cooperatives to the BJP. Matching the party to the newly delimited constituencies, Shah influenced the restructuring of the organization in such a way that many of the old guard in the BJP who were creating noise about Narendra Modi gaining ground inside the party, etc., found themselves out because they didn't know the party. They didn't know the new constituency that the party had to fight. So they could not rise to the challenge. Gujarat has 18,600 villages. Shah set up election management cells in small clusters of villages and then finally in the villages themselves. So he knew he was on real-time information network basis with these villages, and while interviewing prospective candidates, when people told him that I can do so much, so many people are with me, all he had to look up was a spreadsheet which told him exactly how much, as they say in Hindi, kaun kitne pani mein hai, and knew exactly who was standing where. And he would tell the candidate, I mean, this was told to me by some of his bureaucratic aides who accompanied him in his meetings in these villages. He was able to contradict them without raising his voice. Quietly, he was able to tell them that, boss, you are talking rubbish. This is not what the truth is. The fact is that after the delimitation, this constituency has so many this and so many that, and therefore there's no point in exaggerating your claims of your popularity. So Modi had this to be responsible, I mean, to be grateful to Shah about, that Shah freed him from the responsibility of election management, but also because it was not a one-time effort, because urbanization was translated as a guiding principle in practical politics and became thus an important factor in influencing the BJP's victory. The same applies to Karnataka. After the 2001 census and delimitation, Karnataka was the first state to go for elections among all Indian states. I'm talking about something that happened some years ago, but it's germane from our point of view. There were enough indications at the time that Indian parties, which have traditionally campaigned on rural issues, found that they had to include urban concerns as well to win seats. This was largely because the number of assembly seats in Karnataka's capital, Bangalore for instance, went up to 28 from 16 after the delimitation, and the BJP won 17 of them. It had won 6 seats in the previous election. The BJP then went on to win the state. Urban voters, it was felt, held the key to the later elections. BJP's Karnataka leaders agreed that an increased number of seats in urban areas did help the party win the elections, since it modified its campaign to suit the new dynamic. I covered the campaign in that election in Karnataka, and it was very interesting. So a BJP leader who didn't want to be identified told me, quote, "We designed a campaign specific to cities and had a vision document for each city. We had a strong worker base in urban areas anyway. All this helped us in winning the elections." Increased migration is a significant factor leading to rising urban population and consequently the greater role of cities in electoral politics. A recent study by D.P. Singh, who is associate professor at the Mumbai-based TIS, Tata Institute of Social Sciences, found that between 1991 and 2001, migration contributed to 21% of the population growth of cities and towns. Currently, an estimated 28% of the country's people live in cities. After delimitation, the number of urban Lok Sabha seats increased from around 70 to at least 100. This means that before delimitation, 28% of the population translated into 13% representation in the Lok Sabha. Political analyst Mr. GVL Narasimha Rao, who is strongly supporting the BJP, but is still a political analyst nevertheless, and a respected one, has made the point that most parties, including BJP, used issues such as inflation and fuel prices, which are largely considered urban issues, to woo voters in the Karnataka Assembly election as well as in the Lok Sabha elections. The urban vote has certainly become more important with delimitation and now has greater weight than earlier, he said. Further, since urban constituencies are easier to represent compared to rural ones, they may be favored by politicians more. Across the board, political parties are conceding that this trend requires them to concentrate more on urban areas. The CPI secretary, Sudhakar Reddy, told me that now the urban poor will have to be given more priority. Urban necessities like housing, drinking water and employment will dominate politics. We will have to ensure that schemes like the National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme are not limited to rural poor alone. Each party has units both in urban and rural areas and needs to simultaneously concentrate on both. Before coming here, I also had a chat with Kapil Sibal, who has regrettably lost the election and has all the time in the world now to chat with us. He told me that political parties had before the election also, and now in an increased way, will have to concentrate on urban issues. He said the Congress launched a massive scheme like the Jawaharlal Nehru National Urban Renewal Mission, JNNURM, and we have to now do a reality check, because why did we lose when we launched the mission? That's one part of it. But with migration, the poor in the urban areas are as significant as the rural poor, and we have to factor this in future elections in our strategy. Professor Dipankar Gupta, who is an urban sociologist and understands issues of migration, says that this is not, you should take this with a pinch of salt. He says that while one cannot ignore urban voters, rural voters also cannot be taken lightly. He says we must remember that the urban-rural link is an important factor, that the BJP won the Gujarat in the last election since it managed to bridge the gap between the town and the countryside. The town is not a distinct entity anymore. To be honest, I don't even think that the village is a distinct entity anymore. But what urbanization means to political parties is not clear. So while some experts are quick to say that it's an advantage for the BJP, which is seen as an urban-centric party, others are more cautious. Professor Narasimha Rao says that while the BJP might initially benefit in states where it is an important force, this will not be a perennial phenomenon. Another social scientist who is widely respected, Ramchandra Guha, says that this trend might benefit national parties such as the Congress and BJP as well. And this is where the tension comes. Regional parties usually do well by stoking regional sentiments in rural areas. However, with the relative shift in seats towards cities, they may lose out to national parties. So what he's saying is that regional parties become a rural phenomena, national parties become an urban phenomena, and there is a kind of a wall between the two. But not everyone agrees with this. I had a chat with Pratap Bhanu Mehta, who is another person whom we respect a great deal. He says that the ballooning migrant population in cities could actually make urban politics that much more regional. So he says it's a myth that regional sentiments work only in rural areas. And he cites Mumbai. He says Mumbai is the best example of that. In fact, it's possible to follow anti-outsider politics in urban areas because of large-scale migration, which actually, if you look at it, the basis of Shiv Sena and to a lesser degree, I suppose, Mandse, and to a much bigger degree, Nitish Kumar's politics in Bihar as a counterpoise to what is happening in Maharashtra makes a lot of sense. So he says, classically, Pratap Bhanu Mehta says, classically the foundation of regional identities is an urban middle class phenomenon. Now, I've quoted all these people because frankly at the end of all this I was slightly confused, as I'm sure you are too, but these are all processes which are going on in the parallel, and the jury is still out because we don't have sufficient data yet from the 2014 election to understand what urbanization and regional politics has done to our politics. So while delimitation has in theory given the urban voter a greater say in Indian politics, the actual translation of this power depends on a number of factors. Urban voter turnout continues to remain a concern. We saw even in South Mumbai, the turnout was abysmal, despite the fact that people like us also contested the election. Experts have cited urban apathy towards politics as a result for this. So does that mean that politics will disappear from urban areas? I don't think so. Another factor we have to consider, and we were talking about this before the lecture began, is the extent of the population actually enrolled on the voters list, and not just population but migrant population. But these are all issues that come up after the fact. We have to also consider in the greater urbanization of politics in India, the rise, decline or persistence of regional parties. So are we seeing a rise, are we seeing a decline, or are we merely seeing a persistence of them? And if we are seeing a persistence of them, then why? Milan Vaishnav of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace has done some really good work on this. I have been in correspondence with him, and we have exchanged ideas, and we have shared views on this. And he wrote a paper which we discussed it a great deal. So he says that rather than erode the stature of national parties, regional parties have more or less stabilized in terms of their relative power. In the 2014 elections, with the possible exception of Bihar, Andhra Pradesh and Uttar Pradesh, most of the BJP's victory came at the expense of the Congress party. Andhra Pradesh has been in the process of splitting into two states, so that is one of the places we have, I mean, it's one of the states we have to disregard, relatively speaking, because Congress's losses were taken up by a regional party, that is Telugu Desam in Simandra and TRS in Telangana. But having said that, although the number of states where regional parties have gained a greater share of votes, then either of the two main national parties remain roughly the same. In some of the larger states, UP and Bihar, the BJP popularity eroded the strength of regional parties. So you can reach the conclusion, therefore, that regional parties are being supplanted by national parties, but in my view, that is an incomplete conclusion. The ADMK and the DMK continue to stride as colossus in Tamil Nadu. The two parties are cadre-based, so their vote share continues to be the same regardless of the number of seats that they win or lose. The two regional parties in Jammu and Kashmir, the National Conference and the PDP, continue to hold sway despite the strong presence of the Congress, and in Jammu the strong presence of the BJP. In West Bengal, Mamata Banerjee's Trinamool Congress has broken the back of the left, and in Sikkim, the Sikkim Democratic Party has held sway, and Pawan Chamling now is the longest serving Chief Minister of India, now on his 5th term. So what do we really know and fear about regional politics? It's actually, in many ways, why is it the dog that didn't bark? Here again, I just, on the basis of what we discussed with Milan Vaishnav, I want to go over some of the conclusions that we reached. And these are, number one, a common myth about regional parties is that their rise, by definition, has eroded and continues to erode the stature of national parties. But in reality, after a period of unprecedented growth in the standing of regional parties during the late 1980s and early 1990s, the pattern of electoral competition at the national level has achieved quite a stable balance of power. So the aggregate vote share won by the two truly national parties and the rest, meaning primarily regional parties, in the past 5 elections illustrates strikingly that the respective popularity of these two groups is in a rather steady holding mode. They are where they are, and they are likely to stay there. The share of the votes won by regional parties crossed the 50% mark for the first time in 1996. That is why you had the Mili-Juli Sarkar in the center, and the Mili-Juli Sarkar, which is the subject of another lecture, finds itself much more efficient in taking decisions because the stakes for taking tough economic decisions are low, and the incentive to take those decisions is strong. So, but that's another issue. Then it slowed down a little bit, the growth of regional parties. By 1999, the vote share of regional parties has dipped to 48%. By 2004, their vote share crept back to 51%, the same level it had been 8 years earlier, before again rising a little bit in 2009. We still have to get an authoritative figure for the 2014 general elections. I have not had the time till now to sit and collate the figures, but I promise I will do so, and I will send the results to Dr. Palshikar. But if you look at the result, I just had a quick glance at the UP figures, and I find that with 19% vote share, the Bahujan Samaj Party has got 0 seats. And with 7.5% vote share, the Congress has got 2 seats. So there is something that is not quite clear. Who are these among these 19%, and what was the margin, who voted, who didn't vote, and so on. The rise of regional players is seen as with some fear, because the doomsday protagonists say that it directly threatens the status of national players But this overlooks the possibility that regional parties can also hurt one another. So in the first past the post system in India, where victories are possible with a small minority of votes in any given constituency, increasing levels of political competition have led to greater fragmentation of the vote. In 2009, for instance, less than a quarter of the electoral districts were won with a majority of votes. The net result has often been, that regional parties crowd out other rival regional parties like Manse and Shiv Sena here. In 2014, how much rivalry has contributed to the downfall of regional parties, we still have to figure out. So the increasing fragmented vote has affected the share of seats won by regional parties in Lok Sabha elections. In the 14th Lok Sabha, which has just been dissolved, regional parties occupied 41% of the seats, the same share as they held in 1998, but this is actually a decline from the two previous election cycles. So regional parties' vote share reached its highest level in 2009, 53%, but the share of seats allocated to regional parties declined because of their fragmentation. So it gets a larger larger vote share, but the number of seats it gets are fewer. One way in which regional parties were believed to threaten national parties was by developing into national players in their own right. But this fear has not been realized, as even the most prominent regional parties have had difficulty in morphing themselves and their regional standing into national success. You have seen what happened to Aam Aadmi Party, which is, I suppose, a regional party. After when it decided to quit to resign from the Delhi Assembly and to give itself a pan-India look, it got a certain vote share, but I am not sure what its electoral prospects in Delhi are should an assembly election be held. In the 2009 general election, Mayawati, for instance, fielded candidates in 500 of 543 constituencies across India, more than any other party, and yet the party got only 21 seats, all in UP. In fact, it was not even a contender in the majority of the constituencies in which it contested. Its candidates finished among the top 2 in 72 constituencies in all. Contrast this with the Congress, which contested 440 seats, won 206, but was top 2 finisher in 350 seats around the country. The BJP got 116 seats, but finished second in 110 constituencies. So focusing on national level statistics is not really fair, because you're calling them regional parties because they are likely to come, states are the ones by which you have to judge. But here also, regional parties are not in that sense dominant. For instance, currently Congress chief ministers and BJP chief ministers call the shots in the largest states in India, whereas regional parties control a few. But in the late 1990s, the numbers were completely reversed, and regional parties' control over the states peaked in 1997, but has been on the downswing ever since. It's true that they control extremely large states such as UP, Bihar and West Bengal, which are home to 400 million Indians, but national parties still come out ahead, and a majority of Indians today live in states controlled either by the Congress or by the BJP. But numbers aside, I think the most important thing when we are evaluating urbanization, the rise of regional parties and regionalism, and India, the most important idea of regional parties is to view them as catalysts for redefining governance. This is a relatively late phenomenon. It's happened only around 12 years ago. To make their case, for instance, they point to, there is a rise of a new class of state leaders like Nitish Kumar of Janata Dal United in Bihar, or the Biju Janata Dal's Naveen Patnaik in Odisha, who have shown that good economics can also make for good politics. I am quoting now Ruchir Sharma, who's an economist with Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, one of the two. And he says that as a rising force, regional parties represent hope. They are young, energetic, focused on economic development, and in sync with the practical aspirations of a youthful majority. So regional politics have broken the stranglehold of national politics, and in so doing have helped usher in a semblance of competitive federalism. But they are not unique in offering hope. There are several long-serving state leaders from regional formations, but the number of chief ministers from national parties have also connected with voters in ways that have been good. I mean, you can argue about this, but have represented good governance and have also been electorally rewarding. I'm talking about Raman Singh and Shivraj Singh Chauhan, both of whom have been chief ministers for more than 3 terms. And Chhattisgarh has had the same chief minister for 9 years, and Shivraj Singh Chauhan has been in office for 7 years. So they have won their elections again and again. Sheila Dikshit, for instance, was in office for 14 years in Delhi. I'm not saying that regional parties are the panacea for democracy. There are people who argue that they represent democratic aspirations, but frankly, charity begins at home, and the institutions are not really democratic. So institutional democracy has not been subserved by regional parties. In fact, when I was in Bihar, somebody asked me I asked somebody whether they would vote for Nitish Kumar again, and they said, yeah, we'll vote for Nitish Kumar. So I said, you'll vote for Nitish Kumar or you'll vote for Janata Dal? He said, it's all the same. Tomorrow I'll wake up and Nitish Kumar will not be president of Janata Dal United, will not be chief minister. There will be no Janata Dal United. So in UP, for instance, Akhilesh Yadav won the election and became chief minister when he was just 38 years old. He was, the SP's last stint in power was marked by, that is 2003 to 2007, was marked by brazen corruption and a breakdown in law and order, resulting in the total drubbing of the party in the state polls in 2007. The voters were very hopeful that Akhilesh would reject the way of his party's elders, and he was supposed to have had this modern outlook and Western education, but frankly, completely the opposite has happened. And the recent riots between Hindus and Muslims in Muzaffarnagar is a case in point, because many people believe, and I am one of them, that the state's politics is hurtling backwards in time. Similarly, Mamata Banerjee, who abandoned the Congress party to create her own regional outfit, is also hailed for change, Parivartan, that she promised to deliver when she was elected in 2011. But communal clashes and political score settling have badly marred her office in 3 years. Although under Mamata Banerjee, Bengal has become the best performing state when it comes to cleaning up the power sector by raising electricity rates, by rationalizing its fiscal deficit and actually increasing its revenue. But Banerjee is mercurial and not entirely balanced sometimes, not stable at all. She dismissed a man who questioned her about economic policies as a Maoist. She arrested a university professor for drawing an unflattering cartoon of her, and she publicly accused a rape victim of being part of a communist conspiracy to overthrow her. So, we have to keep that in mind. So the problem is that it's all very well to say that regional parties represent democratic India and so on, but they have sole control, leaders have sole control in choosing their candidates, and they don't even bother with the facade of intra-party democracy. Granted that the Congress and BJP are far from paragons of institutionalized party democracy, but for regional parties, the situation is frankly even more precarious. There is a feeling that regionalism and urbanization are leading to an erosion of centralism and the capacity of the central government to take decisions, and eroding federalism by the influence that these parties exert on foreign policy. I think more research has to be done on this, because these arguments are trotted out quite glibly by people, but I think you need to have much more empirical study on this. For instance, I mean, it's true that the role of regional forces as foreign policy actors has grown, but it is less clear that the headline grabbing tussles recently mean that there is a new twist in Indian politics and the relations between states. So there have been 2 cases in the past 2 years, past 3 years, of the regional parties calling the shots and inserting themselves into economic foreign policy decisions taken by the central government. For instance, Mamata Banerjee herself personally scuttled a water sharing agreement that New Delhi had put together with Bangladesh on the Teesta River. The treaty was envisaged as a critical component of the central government's plans to improve relations with its neighbor to the east. But Banerjee vetoed the move, and the treaty could not be signed. And the Dravida Munnetra Kazhagam party of Tamil Nadu quit the ruling coalition over the centre's support for what the party considered to be a weakly worded UN resolution on the Sri Lankan government's treatment of Tamil minorities. But this is, I think, a little overstated. Since the opening up of the economy in 1991, states have consistently exercised their newfound economic policy latitude to craft their own strategies to woo foreign investors, irrespective of New Delhi's outlook. This process actually began with Chandrababu Naidu and his famous blandishments to investors to come to Hyderabad to invest, and Microsoft came, everybody came to Hyderabad. The only point where the center refused to entertain his request was to bypass the central government and go directly to the ADB for a loan, which the central government shot down. And on pure foreign policy matters, India's relations with its neighbors, whether it's Pakistan or Sri Lanka or Bangladesh, has been colored by the respective position of the ruling elites in the border states of Punjab, Kashmir, Tamil Nadu and West Bengal in the past. But now, this could change. For the first time ever, a Sri Lankan president was invited to the swearing-in ceremony of an Indian Council of Ministers. And for the first time ever, the Tamil MP from Kanyakumari took oath in office in the presence of a Sri Lankan leader who is responsible for daily conflict between fishermen of Tamil Nadu and fishermen of Sri Lanka. Today we hear, this is today's news, we hear that an accused terrorist lodged in an Indian jail is going to be extradited to Sri Lanka. So I think we need to study this in much more detail, exactly how regional parties are becoming more flexible and national parties are now going to assert themselves much more on the issue. So emergence of regional politics as major centers of power in India's politics, economics and society is one of the most important developments in the country's post-independence history. But into 2014, are we going to look at, I mean, the third front hasn't happened, and we have a muscular BJP in power. So I think, have we come to a point where regional political parties are on the wane? It's a little hard to say. So to conclude, I would just like to put some questions. Is Indian politics going to be urban? The BJP's immediate plans are to push India into a phase of urbanization like we've never seen before. The NREGA is going to be tweaked for urban conditions. This is based on our conversations with several policymakers in BJP. There are going to be new cities, new airports, new railway systems. So is the new normal for urban going to be the regional, or is it going to be the national? We still have to see. Thank you very much.